and welcome once again. We are very pleased you are here for our first of 6 gallery talks that we will be offering in the next couple of months. My name is Artie Gilbertson, and I have been on the planning committee for these gallery talks. We were hoping for a good turnout, but this is far beyond our expectations, and I do thank you for coming. These talks are sponsored by both Ames History Center and also by the Octagon. And our purpose is to provide you a little more information about the history of Ames and also to give you an opportunity to visit some 150 exhibits that appear in the gallery. Now tonight, our first gallery talk will provide you with an overview of the 150 years we are celebrating. We will give you a preview or a snapshot of those 150 years. And I'd like to introduce Margaret Vance, who is our presenter. She has lived in Ames most of her life, and she has worked and been involved with the Ames History Society for a long time as a volunteer and more recently as a research assistant. She's an excellent researcher, but she's also an excellent resource for the History Center. So, without more time, I will introduce Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I'd have to say it was a little bit intimidating to try to condense 150 years into 50 minutes. And actually I'm going to add one more year because I want you to know what Ames was like, what this area was like before Ames existed. So 151 years ago, this part of Iowa was all tall grass prairie and a wet, boggy quagmire. In fact, the federal government had passed the land on to the state that in turn had passed it on to the counties to sell, labeling it unusable swampland. In spite of that, some early pioneers had already settled here. One of them was Lucian Hoggett, who was the county sheriff. And the Black family lived nearby, as did others. Cynthia and Alexander Duff came here in 1863, the year before our story begins, from Onondaga County in New York. They were wealthier than most pioneer families and made their home on 200 acres of land they purchased between what is now 13th and 20th Street that Alexander cleared and farmed. Also, there were 3 small communities in the area. Bloomington to the northeast of what would become Ames, New Philadelphia and Ontario, both to the west of what is now the college campus. Abraham Lincoln was president, and in spite of the Civil War still tearing the country apart, the railroads were pushing west across Iowa to connect with what would become the first transcontinental railroad. The Cedar Rapids and Missouri River Railroad, later to become the Chicago Northwestern, came as far as Marshalltown. In 1863, they sent their head engineer, Mr. John Inslee Blair, to seek out the best places to build bridges and locate the next depot. He brought with him his friend, Oakes Ames, a successful hardware businessman and congressman from Massachusetts. He was an important stockholder in the railroad and interested in the westward expansion, a good man to have on your side in Congress. Now, 9 years earlier, a man named Washington Graham had built a house on the corner of what would become Stanton and Lincoln Way, where Dunkin' Donuts is today. He was very active in getting the newly established Iowa Agricultural College, located in Story County. When he heard Blair was coming, he was so sure that the route just 80 rods south of the new college would be the place of choice for the new depot that he laid out a town there, calling it Collegeton. He even offered Blair 16 to 20 acres of land free. But alas for him, that was not to be the choice. Had it been, today we'd all be living in Collegetown, Iowa, and Ames would not exist. Blair's first choice of location for the next depot was Ontario, but those folks turned him down. Then he decided on land at the confluence of the Squaw and the Skunk, where bridges could be built and land was really cheap. But the owners, primarily the Hoggets and Blacks, would not sell to him. Somehow he connected with Cynthia Duff. She was a forward-thinking, strong-minded woman who knew how to get things done. She approached the Hoggets and Blacks, asking to buy land for a friend coming from the east. And they sold the land to her, and she turned around and sold it to Blair, never telling her neighbors that her friend was the railroad. Blair chose a spot about where the Dutch Oven Bakery is today for the first depot, and had his chief engineer plat out a town of 12 blocks known today as historic Old Town. It was December 17th, 1864, and our town was born. That same year, the Morrill Act was passed by the U.S. Congress, and Iowa Agricultural College and Model Farm, established 6 years earlier, became the nation's first land-grant college. John Blair, known as the Railroad King of Iowa, created many towns as he laid out the route for the railroad. Among them were these. He was an abstainer from alcohol and included in each clause, included a clause in each land deed stating that if alcohol were ever to be sold or consumed on the property, it would revert to the Blair Land Company. Now, if you own one of those deeds in Old Town, you might be relieved to know that later the Iowa Supreme Court ruled these clauses to be invalid. Cynthia Duff wanted to name this new town for her home county in New York, but Blair chose to honor his friend Oaks Ames. Again, isn't it fortunate that we're not living in Onondaga, Iowa? Ames is a lot easier to spell. However, as a thank you to Cynthia, several streets were named in her honor. Duff Avenue, which was expected to be the main street, and then Main Street's original name was Onondaga, and Kellogg was Cynthia's maiden name. Oaks Ames never returned to see the town that carries his name. He did send a bell to its first church, the Congregational Church, now the United Church of Christ, and that bell is still rung today. After John Blair chose this place, workers were sent by the railroad to build the new depot. Cynthia Duff fed them at her home, and on April 15, 1865, the first train came through what was then called Ames Station on the very day that Lincoln was assassinated. Noah Webster, not the dictionary Webster, built the first house in our new town on the site where Adams Funeral Home stands today. One of the earliest settlers in Ames was a Civil War veteran, Kendrick W. Brown, who was at first a grocery merchant. After a few years, he became a traveling salesman for a New York hat and glove company, traveling the state for the next 40 years. He played a great role in the growth and development of both Ames and the state. His grandson, Farwell Brown, became Ames' first historian, Ames' official historian, and founder of what is today the Ames Historical Society. A group of 8 folks, including Cynthia Duff, of differing denominations began meeting at the depot on Sundays and soon organized themselves into our first church, choosing to be Congregationalists. John Blair, known for his philanthropy, donated 2 lots and $300 to help them build that church on the corner of 6th and Kellogg, where it still stands today in this, their second building. The next year, the Methodists built a small wooden chapel on the corner of Onondaga or Main Street and Kellogg. They soon outgrew it, so they built this church, also at 6th and Kellogg. A little secret, we at the Historical Society have nicknamed this one the Cat in the Hat Church. It was replaced in 1908 with this one that we know today. A couple of years later, the Baptists would build on 5th and Kellogg. When the Christian church joined them down the street, folks began to call Kellogg Church Street. It would be more than 30 years before the first Catholic church was built on Lincoln Way across from what is now the DOT. Today there are 52 places of worship in Ames, including the Chinese E-Free Church, 2 Korean churches, and the Islamic Center. 2 years after its founding, there were 100 people living in Ames. Before the town was founded, a one-room school had been built on land given by the Hoggett family that carries their name. Now, Hoggett School has been preserved by the Historical Society and today resides near 20th Street on the grounds of Meeker School. At first, the children of Ames attended this school. Then in 1868, the town formed its own school district. A 2-room, 2-story school was built at South Kellogg and Sherman, later the site of Lincoln School. When a second one was needed and built at 8th and Kellogg, they were known as North School and South School. In 1881, these would be replaced by this school, built on Clark Avenue, where our City Hall stands today. It was first known as Union School and later as Central. When neighborhood elementary schools were built around town, Central would become the first Ames High School. After serving the community for 31 years, it was replaced by Ames High No. 2, built on the east side of Clark, which would later be known as Central Junior High when Ames High No. 3 was constructed in 1939. This, of course, is today's City Hall. And I'll bet some of you know what this is. This tunnel running under Clark Avenue connected the 2 school buildings. It still exists today as far as the drive-up drop box for paying bills. There was a controversy about the location of what is now our City Hall building. The school board had chosen 20 acres of undeveloped land at the corner of 13th and Grand. Enough space for a campus to include athletic fields like we have today. The folks in the 4th Ward felt this was too far away. Their protests became strong enough that the school board decided to let the voters decide. The board lost, and the new building was built at the Clark Avenue location, with the field house and athletic fields still across Lincoln Way. In 1961, Ames High No. 4 opened at 20th and Ridgewood on the large campus that we know today. Back in 1868, Ames' first newspaper, the Intelligencer, was published. Through the years, our paper has had many publishers and many name changes, the enduring one being the Tribune. It has switched from a weekly to a daily to a twice daily, back to a daily. Other papers such as the Monitor and the Milepost have come and gone, but the Tribune has outlived them all. Time will tell how it deals with the challenges of today's ever-changing technology. 1868 also marked the time liquor would make its first really public appearance in Ames. That year, the Iowa General Assembly passed a law prohibiting intoxicating liquors within a 2-mile radius of Iowa Agricultural College. Now, wouldn't that have solved the Visha riot problems? When a saloon opened in a hotel on the corner of 5th and Douglas, where we are today, a group of 13 determined women, mostly in their 20s or early 30s, descended on it and succeeded in driving it out of town. Never underestimate the power of a group of women. It would be 62 years later before the first beer license was issued in Ames, and 96 years before the first liquor store opened here. A town cannot survive without a thriving business community. The very first business enterprise was run by station master H.F. Kingsbury out of the depot, offering groceries and other necessities. Soon he and a partner built Ames' first dry goods store on Onondaga, or Main Street. This was followed quickly by a drugstore and then a blacksmith and tin shop, and Squire Hoggett ran a small lumber yard. 6 months later, there would be 3 grocery stores, an eating house, a new drug and bookstore, 2 hotels, a hardware store, harness shop and shoe store. Houses were springing up all over. Ames was off and running. Livery stables filled a need, as by horse or on foot were the options for getting around in those days. Various hotels came and went. In addition to the Sherwood Hotel, where the women chased out the saloon, there was this one at Duff and Onondaga, which operated under different names through its many years of existence. Some of you may remember this one, which stood for over 100 years at the corner of 5th and Douglas, just across the street where the History Center is today. And later there would be the Sheldon Munn, with its 72 guest rooms, large ballroom on the 4th floor, private dining room on the 3rd floor, various meeting and sales display rooms, and a 4-chair barber shop, large main dining room, and a separate grill or coffee shop. It was considered the finest hotel in this part of the state. In 1869, Ames was a mere village when Civil War veteran George Tilden brought his family to settle here and start a business. He worked at first with partners and then on his own to establish the Tilden store that would be a presence on Main Street for 113 years, run by several generations of his family. Over time, they sold just about everything, from clothes and shoes to carpets and luggage to groceries and tobacco, even some farm produce. Their alterations department branched out into graduation gowns and college pennants, and eventually morphed into Collegiate Manufacturing Company. The Tilden store was the first in Ames to employ women clerks, and in its prime boasted the only store elevator in town and what they called a rapid wire cash carrier system to zip money back and forth between the customers and the cashier located in the balcony. Ben and Rebecca Adams came to Ames in 1869. 2 of their sons, Jay and James, became prominent businessmen, establishing a grocery store first on the north side of Onondaga and then moving to the corner of Kellogg, where the Ames Building and Loan would later be located and where the Cupcake Emporium is today. Jay later established a furniture and undertaking business further down the block and eventually moved to 5th and Douglas and became known as Adams Funeral Home. It was Jay's sons, Clint and Frank, and later his grandson Terry, who carried on the funeral business. Clint and the other brother, Chev, ran Collegiate Manufacturing Company, which sold college memorabilia and personality pets nationwide. During World War II, they produced raincoats and ponchos for the military, earning the prestigious E for Excellence Award, which you see hanging here tonight. After working with his dad in the grocery store for many years, James Adams' son Howard opened the Candy Kettle in Campus Town. 6 years after our founding in 1870, our population had grown to 636. Ames was officially incorporated that year, and innkeeper William West was elected by popular choice to serve as our first mayor. That same year, Iowa Agricultural College graduated its first class, consisting of 24 men and 2 women. The Ames Cornet Band was formed, the forerunner of the municipal band that we know and enjoy today. For several years, Civil War veteran Captain Wallace Greeley had farmed the land where Green Hills Retirement Community is today. In 1876, he and his wife Mary moved into town, purchasing this home at 12th and Douglas. 5 years later, Captain Greeley founded the Union Bank, Ames' first corporate bank, at the corner of Douglas and Onondaga, today a kitchen design store. Later, he and Mary would build a large Victorian home that, after serving for a while as the Sigma Chi fraternity, is today Adams Funeral Home. By 1876, Ames boasted over 50 businesses. From earliest times, grain elevators were a presence in the Ames skyline and drew farmers to our growing town. In the 1880s, the population of Ames topped 1,000. Telephones were the new technology. The first attempt at one in Ames was a string phone, consisting of 2 oyster cans strung between the drugstore on one side of Onondaga and the doctor's office on the other. The first real phone was found in the Bigelow Hunting and Tilden's dry goods store, and the first long-distance line in the home of Farwell Brown's grandfather, K.W. Brown. Parley Sheldon had lived south of Ames, where he farmed and bred horses for 8 years before moving into town in 1882. After a stint at trading in livestock, he bought the Story County Bank on the corner of Douglas and Onondaga, opposite Greeley's Bank, and they became mostly friendly competitors. Sheldon was a very public service-minded person. After serving as postmaster and on the city council, he would become known as our perennial mayor, serving for 18 years over a 32-year period. Under his various watches, he would, among other things, be largely responsible for the municipal electric light plant, the dinky, the routing of 2 major highways through Ames, and the location of the Iowa Highway Commission, now the DOT, in Ames. 1886 saw the building of our first town hall and calaboose at 5th and Kellogg. Only 2 cells in the jail. They weren't expecting too much trouble. That same year, a major fire on Onondaga destroyed the buildings in the center of the 300 block. Another major fire the next year made the town even more keenly aware of the need for improved waterworks and a fire department. The fires also prompted the city council to pass a law requiring all new buildings on Main Street to be built of brick. In 1891, yet another Civil War veteran came to settle in Ames. Hiram Munn set up his lumber yard on Duff at the end of Onondaga, or Main Street. Generations of his family would remain in business here until 1998, when Eric Munn, the 5th generation, moved it to its new south location, where they are still in operation today. 3 years later, a spectacular fire destroyed the old building. That's when the city bought the grounds for a green space, softening the look of the power plant. Early on, the philosophy of its presidents and the poor condition of Boone Street, now Lincoln Way, had kept Iowa Agricultural College fairly isolated from the growing town of Ames. And in 1890s, under the guidance of President William Beardshare, this began to change. The Ames and College Railroad, supported by Beardshare, Mayor Parley Sheldon, and others, and known as the Dinky, made this connection convenient and affordable at 5 cents a ride. It ran between its barn at the east end of Onondaga, down 5th Street, to its campus station, later known as the Hub, from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day for the next 16 years. It was about a year after the Dinky began running that the people of Ames voted to annex the area west of Grand Avenue, including the college, into the town. President Beardshare also instigated excursion days in 1898, declaring people from all of Iowa to be thrice welcome to come and learn about the Iowa Agricultural College. The attendance that first day was estimated to be between 6,000 and 10,000. It was the precursor of the Visha idea. Also in 1890, Judge J.L. Stevens built the Opera House building on the corner of Onondaga and Kellogg. Now back in the day, every town worth its salt had an opera house, not for operas as we think of them today, but a place for public meetings, graduations, musicals, plays, and for other performances. Though it had a double storefront on the ground floor, the entire second floor of this building was a large auditorium. In the mid-1890s, electricity came to Ames Main Street with the establishment of the municipally owned light plant. In the beginning of the 1900s, the population of Ames had grown to 2,422, with enrollment at the recently renamed Iowa State College of Agriculture and Mechanic Arts at 940. Also, in order to make the dyeing of sweaters easier, the college colors were changed from silver, yellow, and black to the cardinal and gold that we know today. By 1900, Ames had outgrown its first small depot, and the Chicago Northwestern Railroad had converted to a 2-track system. So a new depot was built at the west end of Onondaga. The college landscaping department took over the care of the spacious grounds, which were known as the most beautiful between Chicago and Denver. Just south of the college campus was Mr. A.L. Champlin's farm. He operated a livery barn and grocery store with delivery service on the corner of Lincoln Way and Welch. There were a few boarding houses in the area too. In 1909, Champlin built the first brick building in what would become Campus Town. This is one of the historic buildings recently demolished in the Kingland project going on now. 2 boarding houses and the small building on the right, now home to the Rice House, survive today. The top floor of the Champlin building was a ballroom where the college students held their parties, as the Memorial Union would not be built for another 19 years. On Sundays, both the Collegiate Presbyterians and the Collegiate Methodists held their services there before their churches were built. For those who are interested, Alex has put together an exhibit in the History Center across the street of the artifacts that we were able to salvage before the buildings came down. The early 1900s was something of a boom time for Ames. In addition to the new depot, the Carnegie Library was built on land donated by Wallace and Mary Greeley. It would undergo several expansions over time, this one in 1940 to the north, and this one in 1985 to the south. and of course the one that's taking place today. The National Guard Armory was constructed on 5th Street, later to become O'Neill's Dairy. This building would replace the Opera House on Main Street and was the location of the first Iowa State College intercollegiate basketball games, both men and women's. The Ames Trust and Savings Bank, later to become First National Bank, opened on Onondaga. The Scenic Theater, later known as the Twin Star, became the first movie house in Ames, followed 4 years later by the Princess, that would later be called the Capitol, nicknamed the Bloody Bucket by some for the type of films shown there. Chautauqua came to town, bringing cultural and entertainment events to Ames for a week every summer for the next 23 years. The post office was built at the corner of 5th and Kellogg, and 4 years later, the municipal building, now YSS, was built right across the street. In 1915, Wallace Greeley built this building that we're in tonight, known then as the Masonic Building, because he leased this 3rd floor to the Masons for 99 years. This, by the way, is the year that lease would have been up. And if you've ever wondered about the colorful square in the ceiling, that's where the Masonic emblem once was. All but this floor later became the home of Collegiate Manufacturing Company. The Greeleys had lost their only 2 children in infancy, and when his wife passed away in 1914, Wallace felt it was time Ames had a proper medical facility. He built Ames' first hospital as a gift to the city, naming it in honor of Mary. None of that original building remains today, but surely Captain Greeley would be proud of what has grown from the roots he planted there. It was in 1916 that Ames' perennial mayor, Parley Sheldon, and the Munns built their fine hotel mentioned earlier. Other improvements this decade included the purchase of the first motorized fire engine and the paving of over 6 miles of downtown streets, finally pulling part of Grand Avenue and all of Onondaga, renamed Main Street in 1910, out of the mud. A little side note here, there was some controversy over the kind of paving material to use, as some thought regular bricks would be too noisy for horses' hooves and wagon wheels. So the city fathers decided on wooden bricks. Then the brick manufacturers sued the city over the use of the term bricks. So the streets were paved with wooden blocks, some of which you may walk across and learn more about in the Sweeney Gallery across the hall. With all of this going on downtown, the folks in the 4th Ward, already feeling neglected, became downright aggravated and got up a petition to secede from Ames and form their own separate town. In October 1916, the petition was actually filed in district court and legal notice was served. Over the next few months, there ensued a series of court maneuvers and many public meetings. But in the end, cooler heads prevailed, and by the end of the year, the idea was dropped. The Dinky had had its 16-year run and was replaced by the electric streetcar, which ran down the center of Main Street and then made a loop out on the campus. Its turnaround place became known as Olsonville because it was near the Olson Greenhouse. Olson Greenhouse was a large operation that shipped cut flowers daily to Chicago by train. It was located where the ISU Design Center is today. Mr. Olson, looking to expand his retail business in Ames, built the first totally fireproof building on Main Street. Today it is popularly known as Lucaland's. The transcontinental Lincoln Highway was officially routed through Ames, changing the name of Boone Street to Lincoln Way. And the Wilson Highway, better known to us as Highway 69, also came through Ames. The canning factory opened in Ames, providing employment for many. It was later to become the warehouse for Collegiate Manufacturing Company and met its demise in 1968 in a spectacular fire caused by a lightning strike. In the 1918 Spanish flu spread across the country by returning soldiers from World War I did not miss Ames. Schools were shut down and the state gym was turned into a temporary hospital. Reporting records were not then what they are today, but it's estimated that over 90 flu deaths occurred that involved the Ames community. It had been quite a decade. For many years, the college administration opposed allowing movie houses near the campus, all that distraction for students, you know. The Ames City Council had even passed an ordinance restricting movie houses to the downtown business area. And for a period of time, Ames had a 5-member board of censors to determine if a movie or a vaudeville act was against the public interest and welfare. It wasn't until 1919 that the first theater was built in Campustown by A.L. Champlin. But by the next year, Joe Jabrock managed all the theaters in Ames. In 1937, he would build the magnificent Art Deco Collegian Theater downtown and the Varsity in Campustown a year later. If you're not familiar with where the Collegian Theater was, here's what that site on Main Street looks like today. Some of the green tile that once graced the facade is still visible on the west side of the building. In 1949, Joe Jabrock would build his final theater, the Ranch Drive-In out on West Lincoln Way. The 1920s brought the beginning of Visha, which combined many smaller festivals. In 1924, Joe Jabrock and his brother Wilford opened the first commercial airport in Ames. That same year, Carrie Chapman Catt gave the college commencement address, 41 years after her graduation from Iowa State College. Buses replaced the streetcar, the first step that would lead to the SIRI system of public transportation we enjoy today. The Ku Klux Klan would hold their Iowa conclave in Ames, with a parade down Main Street and the burning of 2 crosses in Maxwell Park, now part of our cemetery. It was a spectacle that would draw a crowd of 8,000. The city would acquire Brookside Park. Remember the swinging bridge? And after residents turned down a bond issue for a municipal swimming pool, Dad Carr built one on his own that would serve the community for the next 80 years. By the end of the decade, the population of Ames topped 10,000, and the student enrollment was growing towards 6,000. By 1922, folks had been calling the business area near Campustown Champlinville or Dogtown, neither of which the merchants in the area were happy about. So they sponsored a naming contest. Campustown was the choice, netting the winner all of $25 in prize money. It was 1933 when the first beer license was issued in Ames, but it would be another 31 years before the first liquor store opened in town. Also in the 30s, a major traffic problem was solved with the building of the underpass on Grand Avenue. Weather played a big part in the news of the 40s. On New Year's Day of 1942, Ames was hit by a major snowstorm, 24 inches in 24 hours. As it happened, the storm stranded a Life magazine photographer in the Sheldon Munn Hotel that netted Ames a 2-page spread in the January issue of the magazine. 4 years later, we were dealing with what was billed the worst flood in Ames history, when 8.21 inches of rain fell in 24 hours and filled the underpass with water and mud. 1943 marked the establishment of the municipal airport. And in 49, the opening of 6th Street to the west finally provided another paved access to the campus, filling a need that had been felt for years. A few weeks later, the 13th Street extension, which had been open to the campus for 23 years, but was mostly a gravel road with a small wooden bridge over the river, was also paved. The 1950 census was the first time Iowa State students were counted as residents, giving Ames a population of 22,898. WOI-TV began broadcasting from the campus, proudly using the tagline, "The first educationally owned and operated television station in the nation." WOI also became the home of The Magic Window, the longest-running locally produced children's show in American history. Parking meters appeared on Main Street, and in 1959, Iowa State College became Iowa State University. In March of 1960, without any fanfare, the last passenger train stopped in Ames. After 95 years of passenger trains, sometimes reaching as many as 24 a day, Ames no longer had passenger service. It was the end of an era. 5 years later, the process began for moving the switch yards, originally located behind Main Street, to a location east of town, and by 1967, that area became parking for downtown shoppers. In 1971, the city would buy the abandoned depot for temporary use by some of the city offices. Later, they would sell it to the Hubble Development Company. In 1961, the National Animal Disease Lab opened just outside of town, bringing jobs and putting Ames on the national map. As time goes on, tastes and styles change, and so does the appearance of a community. After the original wooden structures succumbed to fires in the early years, the brick buildings that would replace them had a Victorian look. In later times, streets were paved, and a more modern look required streamlining the buildings and removing the Victorian trim. And today we might think some of the charm. Today, the city annually offers facade grants to businesses that want to update their storefronts. The business owner must match the dollar amount they receive from the city, and the plan must enhance the historic look of the area. 2 buildings now undergoing such a change are the Town Center Building, the only peaked-roofed building on Main Street. It started life as a livery stable, and over time has housed many things, including Adams Furniture and Undertaking, Hoverstein Furniture, and J.C. Penney's. The other one is the Olson Building. The owner's intention is to give it this look from 1915, but preserving the mural now seen from Tom Evans Park. The same trends were evident in Campus Town. In 1976, this was considered the preferred modern look. Fortunately, it was done over the original brick and was later removed. The current renovation is, of course, irreversible, and time will tell if it's the right choice. Lincoln Way itself has undergone a metamorphosis, starting as a dirt road known as Boone Street. Through the years, it has been straightened and widened again, and eventually somewhat replaced by Highway 30 bypass. In addition to style changes, the preferred shopping areas change over time. After the beginning in the original depot, the move to Main Street progressed from east to west,
When cars replaced buggies and street lighting was improved, Main Street was thriving and the place to go on a Saturday evening, where one might find the men hanging out together around their parked cars while the women shopped. For a period of time in the 40s and early 50s, when students came without cars and the bus service was not what it is today, Campus Town offered second versions of downtown stores, such as Jameson's, Joe's Menswear, and Coe's Flowers. On the other hand, Swank's Jewelry, Melander's Grocery, and the popular women's clothing store Bobby Rogers got their start in Campus Town and then moved downtown. When North Grand Mall opened in 1971, Main Street lost several of its biggest draws, such as Montgomery Ward's, J.C. Penney's, and Yonkers, which had been the first Yonkers store outside of Des Moines. The downtown suffered mightily from the competition until reinventing itself as a cultural district. By the time of the country's bicentennial, Ames boasted 5 major shopping areas: downtown, Lincoln Center, Campus Town, North Grand Mall, and the Ward Plaza on South Duff, not to mention numerous convenience and business centers, plus 106 eating places. We were and still are a welcoming town. So here we are today, out of the swamp, at the side of a major interstate, our population growing near 60,000, with 35 parks and 5 golf courses, 55 miles of bike and pedestrian trails, and 1,400 hotel rooms. Our new hospital facilities are already in use, and the 4th expansion of our library will be opening soon. We have Jack Trice Stadium and the ISU Center that brings us entertainment and sporting events. We've become a popular retirement community, and new housing and business areas are developing, with apartments springing up like mushrooms all over the place. We've come a long way, baby. Well, my 50 minutes are up, and remembering this quote from renowned documentarian Ken Burns, I puzzled over how one ends a history of a community. I finally decided these 3 words would do it for tonight: to be continued. Thank you. Thank you. We'd like to open it up for questions. There's a lot of people here that know a lot about Ames history, more than I do. If any of you have questions, we try to answer them. If not,
In the 150 years that they had a really major celebration like we're having this year, like the centennial or Saturday.
yes, there was a big celebration for the centennial that involved a show that drew hundreds of people for 2 performances and a beard growing contest and costumes, and it was a big celebration. And there was another one for the country's bicentennial. I don't know that date off the top of my head. Anybody know when the Campanile was built? We'll look that up for you and let you know. Georgia. When the Campanile was built. It was in honor of Dean Stanton's wife, who had passed away in 1895, we think. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you so much for coming tonight. We really appreciate it.